The streets of New York never slept, but Elizabeth Carter lay wide awake, clutching a pillow soaked with tears she didn't dare let fall in daylight. In a city of millions, the one person who once held her heart had vanished. No warning, no plan, just a half-hearted phone call and a bag packed for London. That was the night the man she trusted walked out, carrying with him not just the love they had built, but the pieces of her peace. And what hurt more than the abandonment was what he didn't know. What he never gave her a chance to tell him. She was pregnant, and he had betrayed her in the worst way. Jonathan Reed, the man she once danced with under Harlem's golden streetlights, who promised her forever after Sunday gospel and soul food, was now thousands of miles away, building a life as if she had never existed. But the life growing inside her made sure she never forgot him. That would have been enough to break her, but it wasn't just him. It was Grace, her best friend. Her ride or die. The woman who had painted murals with her on the corner walls of their childhood block. The one she called sister, who held her hand during breakups, birthdays, and Broadway rejections. Elizabeth never imagined that the man she loved would sleep with the one person she trusted the most. While she stayed up wondering what she'd done wrong, they had made a mistake she could never unsee. One night. That's all it took. One night while Jonathan was already pulling away, and Grace claimed she was trying to comfort him. One night that would shatter Elizabeth's world and rewire everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the lies people tell to survive their guilt. Jonathan ran, hoping distance would solve what he didn't have the courage to confront. Grace stayed, but she stayed silent, hiding a secret that grew inside her just like Elizabeth's did. 2 women, 2 pregnancies, one man who thought he could vanish without consequence, but time has a way of bringing truth to the surface, and pain has a way of cracking open what people work hard to bury. By the time Jonathan would return, months later weathered by regret, he'd find that love wasn't waiting the way he left it. Instead, he'd face the daughter he never met and the damage he'd never imagined. Because when you walk away thinking no one will be hurt, you forget one thing. Someone always bleeds when love gets careless. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you built your world around them, only to watch that same person tear it down piece by piece? It's strange how love can feel eternal one month and unrecognizable the next. How someone's voice that once felt like home can become a sound that makes your chest tighten. Most people watching right now have loved deeply. Some have forgiven what others would never tolerate, and some still wonder how they let their hearts break for someone who didn't even stay to see the damage. Elizabeth Carter knew that kind of love. She gave it freely. She nurtured it like the art she taught to children in Harlem, patient, bright, and full of hope. When she loved, she believed in forever. Jonathan Reed made her believe it too. He said all the right things. He looked at her like she was the only heartbeat that mattered. He stood by her side through gospel concerts, street fairs, and rooftop dinners. He fit into her world so easily that her friends said he must have been sent by God. But what happens when love starts fading? Not because of distance, but because of distraction. When one person starts chasing success while the other clings to sincerity. Jonathan thought money and ambition would make him enough. Elizabeth thought love and patience would hold them together. Both were wrong. And then came Grace, the best friend who had shared every secret since childhood, who held Elizabeth's hand through heartbreaks, who laughed with her until dawn after long shifts at the community center. Grace was the person Elizabeth trusted to protect her heart when Jonathan started to change. But sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones who sit closest to you. That's what makes it cut deeper. That's what makes it unforgettable. Elizabeth's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about how easily good people can lose themselves trying to fix others. It's about trusting too much, forgiving too soon, and realizing that not everyone who says I love you knows what that truly means. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've forgiven someone who didn't deserve it, or stayed when your soul was screaming to leave. Maybe you've learned the hard way that loyalty isn't always returned. The kind of pain Elizabeth felt isn't foreign, it's familiar. It's that late-night silence after an unanswered call. It's deleting messages just to stop rereading them. It's smiling for people who have no idea that your heart feels like it's splitting quietly inside your chest. She thought her story would end with wedding bells and promises. Instead, it began with secrets and silence. But through her pain, there was something the audience would soon see, something she didn't know yet. Her heartbreak was not her ending, it was the lesson that would shape everything that came after. Because sometimes the people who break you are the very reason you learn what real strength looks like. Before the heartbreak, before the betrayal, there was a girl who simply believed in love. Her name was Elizabeth Carter, Harlem-born, creative to her bones. She could take an empty wall and turn it into a story, just like she turned silence into comfort. Her laugh had a rhythm to it, one that made even the city's roughest corners feel softer. She had a habit of humming old gospel tunes while painting, and believed kids could change the world if someone just gave them a place to dream. She wasn't perfect. She doubted herself sometimes, held on to people too long, gave the benefit of the doubt even when it cost her, but no one could deny her heart was pure. She met Jonathan Reed on a rooftop during a spring art fundraiser. He looked out of place in his sleek charcoal grey suit, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her pause. A white man from Manhattan, tall and clean-cut, with the kind of voice that made people lean in when he spoke. But it wasn't his resume or looks that caught her attention. It was the way he stood still in a world that never stopped moving. He wasn't just watching her art, he was listening to the story behind it. Jonathan said he worked in finance, Wall Street, to be exact, but his favorite music was gospel, and he missed the feeling of real conversations. That night, they talked about everything from Billie Holiday to the legacy of black artistry in Harlem. He didn't pretend to know it all. He asked questions. He listened. And Elizabeth, who had guarded her heart for years, let her walls drop without realizing it. Their first date wasn't even planned. They stumbled into a late-night soul food spot on Lenox Avenue. Over hot collard greens and fried chicken, they talked about dreams. Hers? To open an art therapy program for kids. His? To feel like his life meant more than numbers in a portfolio. By the end of that meal, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. From that night on, they were inseparable. Afternoon strolls in Central Park, hot cocoa runs in Brooklyn while snow dusted the city. Nights in Queens with Grace and her cousins, laughing over wine and old stories. Jonathan even came to Sunday dinner with her family, an old Caribbean tradition where spicy curry goat and laughter filled every inch of the house. He didn't flinch when Grandma started talking about Harlem's past, or when her uncle tested him on black literature. Instead, he leaned in, curious, eager, respectful. Elizabeth fell, hard. And it wasn't just the gestures, it was the consistency. The way he texted her good morning every day. The way he kissed her forehead when she talked about her students. The way he would dance with her in the kitchen, while Aretha played from a dusty speaker. For a while it felt real, like something that could last. But real love isn't built on only the easy moments. It's tested in the spaces where stress creeps in, where ambitions pull people in opposite directions. That's when the little changes started. Missed calls, short replies, cancelled dinners, late nights at the office, a promotion on the horizon. And with it, distance she couldn't close. Jonathan didn't seem like the same man anymore. And Elizabeth, instead of confronting it, tried to understand, tried to be patient, tried to believe that the love they built could withstand the weight of his world shifting. She kept showing up. He kept disappearing, piece by piece, day by day. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that while she was holding the relationship together, someone else had already stepped into the space she left open with her trust. Someone she never expected. What would you do if the person you trusted most stabbed you where you were most vulnerable? Not an enemy, not a stranger, but your best friend. What if the man you built your world around, who once kissed your forehead and said you were his piece, walked out, and left more than just silence behind? What if he took a part of you with him? What if he didn't even know you were pregnant? Now let's go one step deeper. What if the very person who held you while you cried over him was carrying his baby too? That's the storm Elizabeth Carter never saw coming. Not just heartbreak, not just abandonment, but betrayal on two fronts from the two people who mattered most. Grace, the one who helped her rehearse monologues for auditions, the man who said, forever, then packed a bag and disappeared. Two betrayals, one after another, and both from the hearts she thought were safest. It's easy to say you'd walk away, that you'd never forgive. But when emotions run deep and history is layered in love, the answers aren't always that clean. Can you forgive someone who shattered your trust? Can you look into your best friend's eyes, the same ones that used to sparkle with inside jokes, and see anything but betrayal? Can you coexist in a world where the man who left you is raising a child with your closest friend? And what if that man returns, months later, broken, humbled, changed? What would you say if he stood on your doorstep with tears in his eyes and asked to be part of the life he abandoned? Could you ever look at him the same way again? Would you let him back in, or would you finally choose yourself? These are the questions Elizabeth had to face, and the answers didn't come easy. But here's what no one tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't wait for the right moment, and it doesn't care how much you used to matter to someone. But healing, Healing is a choice. And sometimes that choice starts with the most painful confrontation of all, truth. And once that truth comes out, everything changes. The golden haze of a Harlem evening painted the skyline in honey and brass, and Elizabeth Carter stood alone on the rooftop of her community center, gazing out at the city that raised her. The wind carried hints of frying onions and jasmine incense from nearby street vendors, and distant laughter rose up from the block below like music. She wore a denim jacket splattered with paint and a long mustard-colored skirt that caught the breeze with a gentle sway. Her hair was pulled into a soft afro puff, and her eyes, wide, curious and weary, studied the skyline as though searching for clarity in the chaos of her thoughts. A rooftop fundraiser for youth arts had brought her here, but Elizabeth had stepped away from the crowd for air. Her mind had been racing with deadlines, budget gaps, and pressure to keep her after-school program alive. She hadn't come looking for love. She barely had the energy to look for peace. But sometimes, love finds you quietly, in the silence between sighs, in the glance that lingers a moment too long. That glance came from across the rooftop, near the catering table lined with jerk chicken sliders and collared green spring rolls. A man in a dark grey suit was watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but as if he recognized something familiar in her stillness. Jonathan Reed had just arrived, a guest of one of the event's sponsors. He looked like he'd walked off the cover of a business magazine, but there was something grounded about him. His tie was loose, his smile unpracticed. He wasn't mingling or networking. He was standing near the edge, holding a glass of ginger lemonade like he didn't know what to do with his hands. He caught Elizabeth's eyes. She tilted her head slightly, unsure if she should nod or look away. He offered a small, respectful smile, not too bold, not too shy. Elizabeth raised a brow and turned back to the skyline. Seconds passed, then footsteps. "Excuse me," came a calm voice beside her. "You wouldn't happen to know what building that is, would you?" He gestured toward a brick structure with faded murals several blocks down. Elizabeth blinked, mildly amused. "That's the old Langston Hughes Library, closed down last spring." Jonathan nodded, impressed. "You work in this neighborhood?" "I was raised in this neighborhood," she replied, eyes still on the horizon. He held out his hand. "Jonathan Reed." She glanced at it before shaking. "Elizabeth Carter." For the next hour, the rooftop event faded into the background as the two stood side by side, exchanging stories under the lavender sky. Jonathan asked about her work with youth art programs. She asked about his upbringing on the Upper West Side. He admitted his Wall Street job wasn't as thrilling as people assumed. "Numbers are cold," he said, "but what you do, it sounds like it has a heartbeat." Elizabeth didn't say much in response, but her smile, faint, real and reluctant, was enough. 2 weeks passed before they met again. It was a Sunday afternoon. Elizabeth had volunteered to help run sound at an outdoor gospel concert hosted by a local youth church initiative. She didn't expect Jonathan to show up, but there he was, standing near the front row in a navy blue sweater and jeans, trying not to look completely out of place. He gave her a small wave when he caught her eye. Elizabeth narrowed hers, half impressed, half amused. He made his way toward her after the third choir number ended. "You weren't joking," he said, brushing a bit of dust from his sleeves. "Harlem really does come alive on Sundays." "You showed up," she said. "You were curious." "I was," he admitted, "still am." They sat side by side on the edge of a planter box near the speakers. A choir of black teens in white and gold robes sang with power beyond their years. One girl hit a note so pure it made Jonathan's eyes widen. "You hear that?" Elizabeth whispered, tapping his shoulder. "That's home." He nodded slowly. "I've never felt anything like this. It's not just singing, it's a whole story being told." Elizabeth turned to face him. Gospel is survival music. It comes from people who had to believe in joy when nothing around them made sense. He looked at her in awe. "And you believe in that?" "Every day," she said softly. The sun dipped low, casting bronze across the tops of buildings. Kids danced in the grass, elders swayed in folding chairs, and the choir sang on. At one point, Elizabeth and Jonathan found themselves clapping together, singing under their breath. He didn't know the lyrics, but he tried. That effort wasn't lost on her. Later, as the concert wrapped, they shared a plate of sweet potato pie from a nearby stand. "I don't think I've ever tasted anything so perfect," Jonathan said between bites. Elizabeth laughed. "Then you've clearly never had my Auntie Bren's banana pudding." He leaned closer. "Is that a challenge?" That afternoon was their first real moment of connection beyond surface-level curiosity. Harlem wasn't just the backdrop, it was the heartbeat that tied them together. And Jonathan, for all his Wall Street polish, didn't run from it. He leaned in. From then on, something shifted. Jonathan didn't just want to see Elizabeth, he wanted to know her. He asked questions, not the kind people ask to impress, but the kind that let her know he was paying attention. He wanted to know about her grandmother's stories of migrating from Jamaica, about the time she cried when a young boy in her art class drew his absent father as a stick figure with no face, about the wall mural she painted when she was 17 that still stood outside her old elementary school. Elizabeth found herself telling him things she hadn't shared in years. In return, Jonathan opened up about his life too. His parents were distant, his job felt transactional, his apartment in Manhattan was clean and cold, and when he walked through Harlem with Elizabeth, it felt like color had finally returned to his world. They spent late nights walking through Marcus Garvey Park, sipping mango juice from corner stores, listening to buskers play old-school soul under streetlights. He started bringing her tea when she worked late at the community center. She showed him how to tie a head wrap for one of her art workshops. Elizabeth smiled. Living's different when it's not just about you. He nodded, holding her hand. Exactly. Their chemistry was undeniable. But it was more than that. It was a deep, evolving admiration. Jonathan was falling not just for her, but for the rhythm of her life, the people she cherished, the culture she carried with grace and grit. And Elizabeth, well, she never thought she'd fall for a man like him. But here he was, sitting cross-legged in a Harlem basement, helping paint scenery for a children's play about black heritage. She watched him try to trace a line straight and fail miserably. "You're terrible at this," she joked. "I'm trying," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "Trying is enough," she whispered, and somehow it really was. It happened on a warm Friday night. They had just finished dinner at a soul food spot that served fried catfish with lemon slices and biscuits that tasted like home. Jonathan paid the check, but Elizabeth insisted on tipping the waitress directly. She did things like that, little acts of care that no one asked for but everyone noticed. As they stepped outside, the air was thick with summer and the smell of grilled corn from a nearby cart. A saxophone hummed from a corner musician under a flickering light pole. The notes floated like a lullaby over the city. Elizabeth paused. Jonathan noticed. "You okay?" She nodded. "That's my favorite song," she said, pointing toward the saxophonist. "My dad used to play it on Sunday mornings." Without a word, Jonathan extended his hand. Right there on the sidewalk, beneath Harlem's evening sky, they danced. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't perfect. His steps were a little awkward, and her laugh kept breaking the rhythm. But it was beautiful. Strangers passed them, smiling. The saxophonist gave them a knowing nod. Elizabeth rested her head on Jonathan's shoulder as they moved slowly under the pulse of the city. "This," she whispered, "feels like the beginning of something." He held her a little tighter. "It is." And from that moment, the city didn't just feel big anymore, it felt like theirs. The next weekend, Elizabeth invited Jonathan to something that wasn't fancy, wasn't formal, but meant everything to her. A Saturday evening dinner with her circle of friends in Harlem. She didn't dress up, and neither did anyone else. That was the beauty of it. This wasn't about presentation, it was about presence. The living room buzzed with laughter, reggae playing low from the corner speaker as pots simmered in the kitchen. The smell of oxtail stew, garlic butter cabbage, and fried plantains hung heavy in the air. Elizabeth stood barefoot, tossing a salad while directing her cousin Tina to check the oven. Jonathan entered cautiously, holding a bottle of wine he had nervously picked up on the way. He wore a casual button-down, no tie this time. Elizabeth waved him in. "You made it," she said, brushing flour off her hands before giving him a quick hug. "Wouldn't miss it," he said, offering the wine. "I wasn't sure what would pair well." Elizabeth chuckled. "Doesn't matter. This crowd drinks whatever's open." A few heads turned. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Everybody, this is Jonathan. Jonathan, meet everybody." Introductions flew fast. There was Kareem, a music teacher who told dad jokes like it was a sport. There was Lisa, a spoken-word artist with bright blue braids. And then there was Pastor Dwayne, older, warm, who gave Jonathan a firm handshake and an even firmer look, like a quiet test of character. Jonathan didn't flinch. He greeted each person with sincerity, remembering names, asking questions without performing curiosity. At the table, the conversation bounced from protests to poetry, from gentrification to old sitcoms. Jonathan listened closely, learning more about Elizabeth by hearing the way her friends spoke about her. "Liz been holding us down for years," Tina said, reaching for the plantains. She raised money for Miss Johnson's rent last fall without saying a word to anyone. She's too humble, Lisa added. Even when her car broke down, she still showed up to teach art with her bag on her back and paint on her face. She never mentioned any of this, he said. She wouldn't, Kareem chuckled. She's allergic to praise. The table roared with laughter. Later that night, as the group moved to the couch for games and conversation, Elizabeth caught Jonathan stealing glances at her. Not with lust, not with confusion, but with deep, respectful affection. He wasn't just falling for her charm, he was falling for the community she carried with her. And for the first time in a long time, Elizabeth let someone see all of her. Jonathan hadn't expected her to be so magnetic. From the moment Grace Matthews stepped into the apartment, the room tilted just a little. She was wearing a vintage leather jacket over a sunflower dress, hoop earrings dancing as she moved. Her energy was quick, her humor sharp. She entered with a loud, "Y'all didn't start without me, did you?" "Fashionably late," Elizabeth said with a smirk, hugging her. Grace turned to Jonathan. "So, this the Wall Street guy I've been hearing about?" Jonathan stood, smiling. "Guilty." Grace eyed him playfully. "He looks like a spreadsheet with good cologne." Everyone laughed. Elizabeth rolled her eyes. "Grace, behave." "Always," Grace replied, sliding into the chair beside her. "I just got to keep my girl safe." Grace wasn't mean. She wasn't trying to intimidate him. She was loyal to Elizabeth, to their history, to the bond they had built since middle school drama club. If Elizabeth was the calm current, Grace was the flame. She spoke her mind, protected her people, and pursued life like it owed her answers. "I'm working on this one-woman show," she said later, curled up on the couch beside Elizabeth. "Broadway or bust, and trust me, I don't bust." Jonathan was intrigued. "What's it about?" "My mom," she said. "She worked 3 jobs and still came home to teach me monologues. It's messy, emotional, raw. I want people to feel seen." He nodded. "That sounds powerful." Grace tilted her head. "Didn't expect you to say that." "Why not? Most people hear theatre and ask what Disney song I'm singing." Jonathan smiled. "I don't assume. I listen." That answer earned a rare nod from Grace. "Okay, suit, I see you." Throughout the evening, the 3 of them formed an odd but functional triangle. Elizabeth as the center, Grace as the spark, Jonathan as the curious newcomer learning how to keep up. When Grace left that night, she hugged Elizabeth tightly and whispered, "He seems okay. Don't fall too fast, though. You still got dreams, sis." Elizabeth nodded, her heart full. Grace always said what needed to be said, even when Elizabeth wasn't ready to hear it, and in that moment, the 3 of them didn't know how tangled their paths would soon become. One rainy Wednesday, Elizabeth stayed late at the center after the kids had gone. Paper scraps, glitter, and paintbrushes littered the tables. She sat in the middle of it all, flipping through budget notes with a worried frown. She didn't notice Jonathan come in. "I brought food," he said, holding up a brown bag. "I figured you hadn't eaten." She blinked up at him, surprised. "You just show up now?" He shrugged. "I like showing up for you." That quiet answer melted something in her. They sat on the floor, eating noodles straight from the box. Elizabeth vented about grant applications, donor meetings, and how she was losing sleep trying to fund art supplies. "This city loves numbers," she sighed. "But how do you measure what happens when a kid picks up a brush and paints their anger?" Jonathan leaned back, listening carefully. He took a deep breath. "What if I helped? Not just with money. I could help with the proposal, the outreach. Get you meetings with people who write checks for things that matter." Elizabeth looked at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" "Because your work deserves it. And so do you." Over the next month, Jonathan kept his promise. He helped her redesign her grant proposals, reached out to contacts who could support her cause, and even brought her to a networking gala where she pitched the program to a foundation board. Jonathan stood quietly as she spoke, beaming like a proud partner. That night, after the event, she wrapped her arms around him. "I can't believe you did all that for me," she whispered. "You believed in kids," he said, "so I believed in you." It was the beginning of something deeper than romance, partnership, purpose, respect. Elizabeth had always been used to doing it all alone, but now she didn't have to. Spring rolled into summer, and with it came late nights on fire escapes, shared playlists, and Saturday mornings filled with errands that somehow felt like adventures. Jonathan became part of Elizabeth's world without trying to change it. He folded laundry in her apartment while gospel music played from the kitchen. He met her parents during Sunday dinner and shook hands with her uncles like a man who planned to stick around. He started to understand things without needing them explained, like why Elizabeth always left a corner of her canvas blank, or why she wore her late brother's bracelet every day. They weren't perfect. They argued sometimes, about his long hours, about her independence, but the foundation was solid, real, rooted. They didn't post their love. They lived it. Elizabeth taught Jonathan about rhythm, not just music, but emotional rhythm, how to listen between words, how to sit in silence without needing to fix it. Jonathan taught her that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was trust. One night, they walked past a street mural of two black girls painting butterflies into the sky. Elizabeth stopped. "That's how I want these kids to feel," she whispered. "Like they can take their pain and turn it into something that flies." And just like that, the foundation was set. A love that wasn't based on fantasy, but built from showing up, staying late, listening deeply, and holding each other accountable. They were building something bigger than themselves. They just didn't know how much it would be tested. The Saturday afternoon sun was strong over Harlem, but Elizabeth's nerves buzzed louder than the traffic outside. She stood in her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the sides of her floral blouse for the third time. Today wasn't just any visit, it was family dinner, and Jonathan was coming. He had met her friends, he had seen her community center, he had even survived Kareem's endless jokes. But this was her mother's kitchen, her father's silent stare, her grandmother's stories, her cousin's side-eyes. This was home in its rawest, most unfiltered form. When Jonathan arrived, bouquet in hand and a fresh button-down under his jacket, Elizabeth met him at the curb. "You look worried," he said, trying to read her face. She gave a soft laugh. "You're walking into an island family house. There's no warm-up round. It's just all or nothing." Jonathan nodded slowly, suddenly aware of how different his upbringing had been. "Then I'll follow your lead." They walked up the narrow stairwell to the brownstone apartment filled with the smell of jerked chicken, rice and peas and sizzling oil. Laughter and island patois echoed from the kitchen and spilled into the hallway. Elizabeth's mom, a regal woman with shoulder-length locks and a presence that commanded both peace and precision, opened the door. "This him?" she asked, voice neutral but sharp. "Mom, this is Jonathan," Elizabeth said gently. Jonathan extended his hand. "Mrs. Carter, it's an honor." Mrs. Carter shook his hand briefly. "We'll see about that." Behind her, cousins peeked around corners, and Elizabeth's younger sister, Mara, grinned from the hallway. Over the next 20 minutes, Jonathan was hit with a sensory overload. Caribbean music thumped in the background, voices layered on top of each other, and children ran through narrow spaces with unmatched energy. The dining table was already set with steaming platters, curried goat, callaloo, fried dumplings, and plantains glazed with brown sugar. Elizabeth's father sat at the head of the table, barely speaking. He only looked, not out of rudeness, but out of caution. Halfway through the meal, he finally spoke. "So, Jonathan, you know who Marcus Garvey is?" Jonathan swallowed his sip of ginger beer. "Yes, sir. He was a Jamaican political leader, one of the most important Pan-African voices of the early 20th century." A brief silence. Then Mr. Carter nodded. "All right." That was as close as he'd ever get to a blessing. The table resumed its rhythm. Laughter flowed again. Jonathan relaxed ever so slightly. "You got kind eyes," she said. "But kind eyes can still break hearts if they're not rooted." Jonathan crouched beside her. "I don't plan on breaking anything." The old woman chuckled. "Nobody plans to. But love is heavy. You strong enough to carry her?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. "I want to be," she smiled. "Then take your time. You don't water Caribbean roots with rush." That evening stirred something deeper in Jonathan. He had grown up in a world where culture was presented neatly, in museums, documentaries, classroom units. He hadn't known it could be lived, breathed, cooked, and sung around a table until now. In the days that followed, he started paying more attention. He picked up James Baldwin essays and watched interviews by Angela Davis. He listened to old speeches from Malcolm X and tuned into podcasts that explored black liberation, Caribbean migration, and Harlem history. One afternoon, he brought Elizabeth to a bookstore near 125th Street. "Pick out 3 books for me," he said, "on black love, on history, and on identity." Elizabeth arched a brow. "You sure? I want to understand more than what's easy," he said. "I want to understand you." They sat on a park bench afterward. She handed him The Fire Next Time, a Sartre, an autobiography, and a poetry book by Audre Lorde. "It's not about checking boxes," she told him. "It's about learning without expecting applause." "I don't want applause," he said. "I want to be better. I want to be worthy." That sincerity didn't fix everything. Jonathan still fumbled. He asked awkward questions sometimes. He misunderstood nuances. He confused dialect with accent once, and Elizabeth didn't let it slide. "Words matter," she said, firm but gentle. "They hold history." He nodded, corrected himself, and kept learning. But what stood out most wasn't how quickly he learned, it was that he never stopped trying. He didn't treat her culture like an exhibit. He treated it like a second language he was willing to learn, word by word, mistake by mistake. When Elizabeth took him to the African burial ground monument downtown, he held her hand the whole time. He didn't speak while she traced names on the wall with her fingertips. He didn't fill the silence. He honored it. And for Elizabeth, that mattered more than any perfect answer ever could. A month after the dinner, Elizabeth found herself walking to Jonathan's apartment with a pot of brown stewed chicken and a tin of sweet bread wrapped in a towel. Jonathan grinned. "You can claim whatever you want with smells like that." They sat on the couch, bare feet tucked under legs, plates balanced on knees. The conversation flowed between bites, and laughter danced between them like a rhythm they'd known all their lives. Elizabeth noticed the way Jonathan looked at her now, not as someone he was infatuated with, but as someone he respected, admired, trusted. One evening, after a long walk through the city, they sat on the fire escape watching lights flicker in the apartments around them. "I know this probably feels like two different worlds," she said quietly. Jonathan turned to her. "It does, but I don't want to live in mine anymore if you're not in it." She blinked, caught off guard. "That's a lot." "I mean it," he said. "This isn't a phase for me. I don't want this to be temporary." Elizabeth looked down at the street, then back at him. "You sure? I've never been more—" She didn't answer right away. She just leaned her head on his shoulder. They watched the city in silence. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real, and real was more than enough. That Friday, the rain came gently, soft and steady, turning the streets reflective and quiet. Jonathan came over with an umbrella and a warm smile. Elizabeth wore an oversized tee and socks. She had no makeup on, her hair wrapped in a scarf. She looked like home. They cooked together, plantain pancakes and curry chickpeas, laughing when the oil popped and stained Jonathan's shirt. After dinner, they danced barefoot in the living room to an old Anthony Hamilton song. No choreography, no steps, just two people moving to the same rhythm. They sat on the couch afterward, her legs draped over his, a blanket between them. Jonathan brushed a curl away from her cheek. "You make me feel like I've finally landed." She leaned into him. "You make me feel safe." They kissed, slow, tender, unrushed. When they moved to the bedroom, it wasn't out of impulse or need. It was gratitude. Mutual understanding, a quiet merging of trust and desire. They held each other as the rain tapped the window, skin warm under sheets, breath sinking like a soft lullaby. That night, they didn't speak much. They didn't need to, because sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it just holds you and lets you rest. The birthday plans weren't elaborate. Elizabeth never asked for extravagance. Just time, just presence, just people who made her feel loved. It was a warm July evening, and the dining room table at her parents' place had been dressed with a soft blue cloth and ceramic plates brought out only for special occasions. Her mom had made stew peas. Her grandmother baked her famous spiced coconut cake. Mara brought her a handwritten poem wrapped in a ribbon, and Jonathan was supposed to bring himself. He promised he'd leave the office early. He said it 3 times that week. Elizabeth believed him because he hadn't broken that kind of promise before. But as the food cooled and the family gathered around to sing, his chair sat empty. Elizabeth checked her phone. Nothing. No call, no message, no Jonathan. She smiled politely when her aunt asked, "Where's your Wall Street man?" and gave a soft chuckle when her father muttered, "Probably stuck at a meeting with people who forgot how to eat food cooked with love." The candles on the cake flickered. Everyone sang. Elizabeth closed her eyes and made a wish that her disappointment wouldn't show. She didn't want her family to feel awkward. She didn't want anyone to think they had to fill in his space, but the silence next to her felt louder than anything. By the time the plates were cleared and leftovers packed in foil, she stepped outside to get air. The evening was quiet, only the hum of neighbors and the clink of bottles behind a bodega. Her phone buzzed. "Jonathan, I'm so sorry. The meeting went long. I'll call you in an hour." Just that. No happy birthday. No I miss you. No I'm on my way. Elizabeth stared at the message, the glow of the screen blurring through the heat in her eyes. She slid the phone back into her purse without replying. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the phone rang. It was him. She let it ring 4 times before answering. His voice came through, tired. "Liz, I know I messed up. I really wanted to be there." "I waited," she said softly. "We all did. I didn't think it'd run that long," he said. "You know this deal's a big one, bigger than my birthday." Silence. "It's not about just showing up," she whispered. "It's about showing me I matter, even when life gets busy." "I know," he said, his voice flat. "I'm sorry." There was a long pause. "Happy birthday, Elizabeth," he said finally. "Thanks," she replied, already turned to the wall, her back to the phone. The missed birthday wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was the start of a pattern. Jonathan's hours stretched longer. His eyes stayed glued to his phone even during date nights. He carried 2 phones now, one personal, one work, and the work one never stopped buzzing. Elizabeth tried to be understanding. She knew ambition came with sacrifice. But it felt like all the sacrifices were hers. He cancelled on brunch with Grace, skipped a Saturday art exhibit the kids at her centre had curated, left early from church service because of client calls. Each excuse came with a strained smile and a rushed kiss. But behind her nods and reassurances, Elizabeth felt herself withdrawing, emotionally, inch by inch. They still loved each other. That much hadn't changed. But love doesn't thrive on leftovers. One evening, Jonathan came over to find Elizabeth surrounded by papers, sketchbooks, and donation forms. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie. "I brought sushi." She didn't look up. "I already ate." "Oh," he said, standing awkwardly. "I thought we were doing dinner." "You thought," she said quietly, still writing. "I waited till 8. He set the food down, walked around the table. "Can we not do this tonight?" She finally met his eyes. "Do what, feel?" "Elizabeth," he rubbed his face. "I'm doing my best." She stood, arms folded. "And I'm not?" He stepped back. "I didn't say that. But that's what it feels like," she said. "Like your work gets the best of you, and I get whatever's left." He sat on the couch, defeated. "It's just a season. Once this deal's over—" "Every season's been a deal, Jonathan," she said, voice trembling. "At what point do I matter enough for you to fight for space in your life?" He said nothing. She walked away, back to her papers, back to her peace. But peace was harder to find now. Even in silence, the tension sat heavy between them. Grace noticed before Elizabeth said anything. She always had that gift, reading between smiles, listening beyond words. She could feel the shift in Elizabeth's energy. The sparkle had dimmed, the confidence wavered. They sat on Grace's front stoop one afternoon, sipping cold tea and watching kids ride bikes down the street. "You haven't talked about Jonathan much lately," Grace said casually. Elizabeth gave a tight shrug. "He's been busy." "Too busy for you?" Elizabeth hesitated. "He's working hard. Big deal coming up." Grace nodded, slowly sipping. Elizabeth rolled her eyes. "Don't me, I'm not," Grace said, facing forward. "I'm just thinking how a man can chase money and still lose everything if he forgets to look back." Elizabeth leaned her head against the rail. "He's not a bad person." "I didn't say he was," Grace said gently, "but good people can still break hearts when they stop showing up." Elizabeth exhaled deeply. "I keep thinking if I wait a little longer, it'll go back to how it was." "And how was it?" Grace asked softly. Elizabeth closed her eyes. "He made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't alone." Grace reached out and took her hand. "You're still not. I got you, always." Elizabeth looked at her best friend and felt the tears come closer than she wanted. "Grace." "Yeah?" "I don't want to lose him." "I know," Grace whispered, "but don't lose yourself either." They sat in silence as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It was the kind of quiet that carried both comfort and warning. Grace didn't say more, but in her heart, she was worried, because she'd seen too many women shrink to keep someone else's world spinning, and Elizabeth was the last person she wanted to watch disappear behind someone else's ambition. Elizabeth sat in her apartment one night, staring at the painting above her couch. It was unfinished, just like everything else lately. The calls from Jonathan were fewer. The "just thinking about you" texts had stopped. The warmth between them had cooled to polite check-ins and awkward silence. She played back their moments: Central Park, Sunday dinner, dancing barefoot in the living room. Where had it all gone? She didn't want to sound needy. She didn't want to beg for attention. But she missed him, missed them. The next morning, she sent him a message. "I miss you. Are we okay?" Hours passed. He finally called that evening. "I've just been swamped," he said. "You know how it is." "I know," she said softly, "but I don't feel it. That's the problem." There was a pause. "I don't know how to balance this," he admitted. "I'm tired all the time." Elizabeth's heart ached. "So am I, Jonathan. But I still show up." He sighed. "I know. I'm not trying to fail you. You already are," she whispered. There it was, truth laid bare. Neither spoke after that. The silence wasn't angry, it was exhausted. Love hadn't vanished, but it had faded, worn down by absence, unanswered questions, and emotional neglect. That night, Elizabeth curled into her blanket, clutching the pillow that still smelled faintly of his cologne. And deep in her chest, the first real seed of doubt rooted itself, not because she stopped loving him, but because she no longer knew if he could love her the way she needed to be loved. It was a Thursday afternoon when Elizabeth decided, enough of the waiting, enough of the distance. If Jonathan was buried under pressure and long hours, maybe what they needed was a moment to breathe. A reminder of the love they'd built, a picnic by the East River, not the trendy kind you saw on social media with flower crowns and matching pillows, but something rooted in memory. The East River held their history. It was where they had once walked, during a chilly autumn evening with hot drinks in hand, talking about dreams and fears. This time, she wanted it to feel like a reset. She packed his favorite things, a folded wool blanket, 2 chicken pesto sandwiches from the corner cafe, a mason jar of iced tea with lime, and a small playlist of the gospel songs they used to hum in the kitchen. She even painted a tiny card that said, "For us, because we still matter." Jonathan didn't respond when she texted the plan in the morning, so she sent a follow-up. "Riverside Park, 6 p.m. Come straight from work. I'll be waiting." At 5:45 p.m., she laid the blanket out beneath a tree not far from the river's edge. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows along the water. Seagulls circled in the distance, and kids laughed near the walking trail. Elizabeth sat cross-legged, adjusting the sandwiches and drinks. She even lit a small citronella candle to keep the bugs away. She checked her phone, 6:03. Nothing. 6:15. Still nothing. Her smile dimmed, but she didn't panic. Maybe he was stuck in a meeting. Maybe traffic was bad. Maybe... 6:27. That's when she saw him, walking slowly from the trail above, phone in hand, gaze distant. She stood. "Hey!" Jonathan looked up, caught off guard. "Hey! Wow!" She gestured to the blanket. "I thought we could do something different tonight." He hesitated, then walked over. "This looks... nice." She watched him closely. His face was tired, his shoulders stiff, his eyes didn't carry the same warmth. "Sit," she said, patting the space next to her. He did, but not all the way. His hands stayed in his lap, fingers tapping against his thigh. Elizabeth handed him a sandwich. "Same one you liked last fall. From the cafe near the church." Jonathan took it, unwrapped it slowly, then placed it beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just a long day, you said that yesterday," she said gently. "I know." They sat in silence. The river moved steadily, as if indifferent to their tension. She reached for his hand. "Jonathan, I know things have been hard lately. I miss you. I miss us. So I thought maybe we could just take a minute and remember what we still have." His jaw tightened. He looked down. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. Elizabeth's chest tightened. She leaned back slightly, preparing herself. "Okay. I've been offered a transfer," Jonathan said, not looking at her. Elizabeth blinked. "Transfer?" "To London," he clarified. "The firm's expanding. They want someone to help lead the new strategy team over there. It's a big opportunity." "London," she repeated. "Yeah," he said. "It came up a couple weeks ago. I didn't know if it would go through, but now they're pushing for a final answer by the end of the week." Elizabeth's heart raced. "You didn't think to talk to me before now?" "I didn't want to say anything until it was real," he said quickly. "And honestly, I didn't know how to bring it up." She stood, brushing off her skirt with trembling hands. "You didn't know how to bring up the fact that you might move across the ocean?" Jonathan stood too, facing her. "I wasn't trying to keep secrets. I was just unsure. You've been distant, skipping things, pulling away, and now it's clear why." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not just about the job. It's everything. I feel stuck, here, with everything piling up. I thought maybe space would help me figure out what I really want." "And what about what I want?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I don't know, Elizabeth," he said. "I care about you, I really do, but I don't know if I can be what you need right now." The silence between them was unbearable. She felt like someone had reached into her chest and ripped out everything they had built. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I haven't decided yet," he replied, "but I'm leaning toward going." The words hit like a cold wave. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying not to cry. "You're choosing a new city, a new life, over us." "I'm choosing clarity," he said. "I need to figure out who I am when everything's not pulling me in 1,000 directions." She stared at him, disbelief etched into her face. "I never asked you to be anyone else, Jonathan. Just to show up. That's all I ever needed." He looked away. "Sometimes showing up doesn't fix what's already cracked. And just like that, The first threads of something sacred began to fray. Elizabeth didn't sit down. She paced the edge of the blanket, unable to hold in the storm building inside her. "You're really saying you'd rather go across the world than stay and fix this?" Jonathan took a slow breath. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" she demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds a lot like goodbye wrapped in, 'I'm confused.'" He looked hurt. "This isn't easy for me either. You made it easy the moment you kept this from me." She moved closer, her voice trembling. "Was any of this real to you? The Sunday dinners, the nights we stayed up talking, the way you told me I made you feel alive?" "Of course it was real," he said firmly. "But things change." She scoffed. "That's convenient. I didn't plan for any of this," he said, now frustrated. "I didn't plan for this opportunity, or to feel lost, or to fall in love while not knowing who I am outside of this job. And I didn't plan," she said, "to love someone who disappears the second life gets complicated." His eyes dropped. "I'm sorry." She stared at him, tears finally falling. "You said you'd show up, that you'd stay." "I know," he whispered. "I failed." The wind picked up. The candle flickered and died. Jonathan reached down, folded the blanket. She didn't stop him. She was too hurt to move. When he turned to leave, she said softly, "I planned this for us. I thought maybe if I reminded you who we were, you'd remember why we started." He paused. "I remember." She stood still as he walked away. "I just don't know if I can be that man again," he said without turning around. Elizabeth watched as his figure grew smaller, finally swallowed by the curve of the trail. She stood alone, the East River beside her, their sandwiches untouched. The words he left behind echoed louder than anything else. The following day passed in a haze. Elizabeth didn't go to the center. She ignored Grace's calls. She walked the streets of Harlem with no destination in mind, heart heavy and head spinning. Jonathan hadn't said goodbye. Not exactly, but he hadn't said he was staying either. Vague promises floated in the space between them like ghosts. "I don't know what I want." None of those phrases meant "I choose you." By Saturday, she received a final message. "Flight's Monday. Let's talk tonight. I'll come by." She didn't reply. But she waited. That evening he arrived, not with flowers or tears, just with tired eyes and a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He stood at her doorway. She didn't ask him in. "I'll call you when I land," he said quietly. Elizabeth nodded once. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the little card she had made, the one from the picnic. He handed it back to her. "I couldn't throw this away." She looked at it, the words now feeling like a relic from a different lifetime. "For us. Because we still matter." "Do we?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan didn't answer. He just stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said one last time. And with that, he turned, walked down the stairs, and disappeared into the New York night. Elizabeth stood at her door long after he left, still, silent. She didn't cry until the candle wax from the picnic melted in her purse, and she found the napkin he had never used. It had her handwriting on it. "You're worth the wait." But maybe she was the only one waiting. The sun had gone down, but the sadness inside Elizabeth hadn't. She sat curled up on her small couch, knees drawn to her chest, a forgotten cup of herbal tea growing cold beside her. Her birthday had come and gone, but there were no leftover balloons, no candles melted into half-eaten cake. Just silence. Silence that screamed. Jonathan hadn't called, he hadn't texted, he hadn't even shown up. And for a man who once danced with her barefoot on the Harlem sidewalk under blinking street lamps, this absence cut deeper than any breakup ever could. Knocks at the door startled her. 3 gentle taps. She didn't need to guess who it was. Grace. Wearing a hoodie and leggings, Grace stepped inside the apartment like she had done 100 times before. But tonight, her entrance felt heavier. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Just sat beside her friend and wrapped her arms around Elizabeth like a human blanket. "I brought sweet potato pie," Grace whispered, pulling a bakery box from her bag. "But you look like you need something stronger than sugar." Elizabeth managed a weak smile, eyes still wet. "He forgot, Grace." "I know, baby. I know." Grace held her tighter. "And it ain't right. You deserve better." They sat like that for minutes, maybe hours. The city outside didn't pause for heartbreak, but inside that apartment, time felt suspended. Grace wiped a tear from Elizabeth's cheek. "I hate seeing you like this. I thought we were building something real," Elizabeth murmured. "But lately, he's been somewhere else, always distracted, work, London, everything but me." Grace's lips tightened. She'd noticed it too, the way Jonathan's eyes wandered, not just in space, but in focus. His calls to Elizabeth were shorter, his presence more fleeting. But she kept those thoughts locked inside for now. Sometimes men don't realize what they have until it's gone, Grace said gently. But that's not your burden to carry. Elizabeth rested her head on Grace's shoulder. You think he's still the man I fell in love with? Grace hesitated, a beat too long. I think people change when they feel pressure. Doesn't mean they stop loving you, but it does mean they can get lost. Elizabeth closed her eyes. I just don't want to lose myself waiting for him. You won't. You're stronger than that, Grace whispered. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. They stayed wrapped in that stillness, Grace humming softly to fill the silence, the way they used to do back in college when life felt simpler and heartbreak wasn't this kind of sharp. In that moment, Grace was everything a best friend should be, present, steady, soft when needed. But even she didn't know the storm coming. The bar on the Lower East Side was dim and far too loud for a man like Jonathan to think straight. But thinking wasn't what he came here to do. He nursed his second glass of bourbon, the ice melting faster than his composure. Around him, laughter echoed, glasses clinked, strangers bumped shoulders with no apologies. But he barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else. London was calling. He had signed the transfer papers, and Elizabeth hadn't even fought him on it. She'd stood there, stunned, her heart in pieces, and he'd walked away with a stiff goodbye and a heart full of conflict. Now here he was, alone, far from Wall Street meetings, far from Elizabeth's warmth, and deeper in confusion than he cared to admit. Why hadn't he stayed? Why hadn't he chosen her? Because life was complicated, because he was afraid, because something inside him never truly believed he deserved her. And tonight, all of that guilt poured itself another drink. As he stumbled out into the cool New York night, the air bit at his cheeks. He checked his phone again. No texts, no missed calls, no happy birthday messages from Elizabeth. But why would there be? He was the one who vanished. His feet moved without aim, but his heart pulled him toward Harlem. And then, Grace. She was leaving the corner store when she spotted him. Jonathan? He turned too fast, nearly tripping. Grace? She rushed over, catching his arm. You okay? He chuckled bitterly. Define okay, you're drunk. I'm confused, that's clear. She looked at him hard, then nodded. Come on, where? My place. You shouldn't be walking around like this. Let's get you water, food, something. He didn't argue. Grace's small apartment was neat and warm, the kind of place where plants lived long lives and gospel music played on low from speakers by the window. She sat him on the couch, tossed him a throw blanket, and poured him water. You smell like a liquor store and sadness, she said, handing him the glass. He smirked. That obvious? I've seen worse. Jonathan leaned back, covering his eyes. I messed up, Grace. I know. I should have stayed. Should have shown up on her birthday. Should have... She cried herself to sleep, Jonathan. The words cut deeper than anything he'd felt all night. He sat up. I didn't mean to hurt her. Grace leaned on the arm of the couch across from him. But you did... Why'd you come here? I don't know. I guess I didn't want to be alone. And you've always been... Always been what? He looked at her for a long moment. Solid. Real. The silence between them grew thick. Grace looked away, then back. You need to sleep this off, she said. We can talk in the morning, and your head's clear. But he didn't move. He just stared at her, eyes glossy from drink and regret. Do you ever feel like you're drowning, even when everything looks perfect on paper? All the time, she answered honestly. And yet, here you are, always holding people up. Including me. Grace sighed. Sometimes I wish someone would hold me up too. Their eyes locked. For a split second, it felt like the room shifted. Jonathan leaned slightly forward. Grace didn't move. Maybe she should have. Maybe she wanted to. But grief and empathy and guilt don't always follow logic. And when you mix them with bourbon and broken hearts, lines start to blur. The apartment was too quiet after the moment passed. Grace stood up, moved to the kitchen, and began fussing with the kettle. Though she had no plans to drink tea, she just needed something to do with her hands. Something to keep her grounded. Jonathan, meanwhile, hadn't moved from the couch. His head rested against the cushion, eyes shut, body slumped with the weight of everything unspoken. Guilt hung thick between them, already present before anything even happened. But the danger wasn't in the words left unsaid. It was in the emotions neither of them had fully processed. Two people deeply connected to the same person, two people hurting in silence, and one room where the silence started to ache. Grace returned to the living room, keeping her distance, sitting at the edge of the armchair. Her fingers curled into the fabric. You should sleep. I know. I mean it, Jonathan. You're not thinking straight. None of this makes sense. His eyes fluttered open, red and damp. What does? Elizabeth doesn't deserve more pain. You walking out on her was enough. You don't have to tell me. I know heartbreak when I see it. Her voice cracked, just slightly. He looked at her again. You're hurting too? Grace didn't respond at first. You think it's easy watching your best friend break every night? Watching her try to smile while she's falling apart? I've hated you these past few weeks, Jonathan. I deserve that. His voice dropped. Then tell me to leave. Silence. Grace, he said again, voice low and gravelly. Tell me to leave. Her lips parted. But no words came. Instead, she sat back down beside him. Closer this time. It wasn't passion. It wasn't longing. It was a cry for comfort. Mutual, hollow and aching. He reached for her hand, not out of desire, but instinct. The air between them changed. It wasn't heated. It wasn't right. But it happened. A kiss turned to another. Apologies tangled with shallow breaths. Grace whispered his name. He muttered hers. But they both knew, even in the midst of it, that this wasn't love. This wasn't healing. This was a fracture widening. And afterward, when the dawn light crept in through the blinds, neither of them smiled. No warmth, no joy, just the raw, cold aftershock of regret. No words were exchanged. What could they possibly say? The line was crossed. And everything would be different now. The morning light was cruel in how it revealed everything. Grace sat at the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, heartbeat thudding in her ears. The sound of her own breathing was too loud, too real. Her apartment, usually a place of music and peace, now felt like a stranger's room. Jonathan. The silence between them wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. What they'd done wasn't a secret yet, but it was already a wound that would fester in both their souls. Grace finally looked up. Her voice was hoarse. You should go, please, she said sharply. Go. He froze, staring at her with the realization that there was no version of this that ended cleanly. His voice cracked when he finally said, I didn't mean for this to happen. Grace's laugh was soft, broken. You think I don't know that? You think I wanted this? Elizabeth's my best friend, Jonathan. He closed his eyes. I know. You don't, she said quietly. You don't know what she's been through, the walls she had to break down just to trust you. His eyes glistened. I never stopped caring about her. Then why are you here? Grace's tone trembled, but her anger was aimed more at herself. Why did you come to me? Jonathan didn't have an answer. Because there wasn't one that made sense. Because broken people reach for the nearest person who understands their pain, even if it's the wrong one. He ran a shaky hand through his hair. I'm leaving for London tonight. Grace froze. Tonight? He nodded. It's already set. The flight's booked. Jonathan's jaw tightened. What else can I do? Tell her the truth, Grace said instantly. He turned, startled. Are you serious? She nodded. You owe her that much? He shook his head slowly. That would destroy her. It already did, she said through tears. You just don't know it yet. Jonathan stepped closer but stopped short. If I tell her, she'll hate you too. Grace's voice broke. Then maybe I deserve that. Jonathan looked at her, the guilt weighing heavier than the suitcase he'd soon carry. I can't do that to her. I can't let her look at you like you're the villain. Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. We already are. The words sat between them like stones. He looked toward the door. I'll send a message when I land. Don't, Grace said. Just go. Jonathan hesitated for a long moment. Then he left. When the door shut behind him, Grace's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, crying into her palms, whispering apologies to a woman who wasn't even there to hear them. Later that day, Elizabeth called. Her voice was soft, tired, but hopeful. Grace, can I come over? I don't want to be alone. Grace froze, the phone pressed to her ear. Every instinct screamed to confess, but her heart refused to finish the ruin she had helped start. So she said, Of course, baby, come. When Elizabeth arrived an hour later, she was wearing one of Jonathan's old sweatshirts, faded grey, sleeves too long, the kind he used to wear when painting her walls or helping her move canvases. Grace's throat tightened. Elizabeth sat down beside her, tears glistening. He left. He didn't even call. Grace reached for her hand, trembling inside. I know, sweetheart. Grace forced herself to smile softly, even as her eyes filled. You're going to get through this. Elizabeth leaned her head on Grace's shoulder. You promise? Grace swallowed hard. I promise. And that was how the lie began, not out of malice but mercy. Not because Grace wanted to betray her best friend, but because she couldn't bear to watch her crumble all over again. But guilt doesn't fade with time. It lingers, it festers, it changes people, and as the days turned into weeks, Grace carried the weight of that night like a hidden scar, while Elizabeth carried a love that had already died without her knowing. Neither woman spoke of it again, not yet, but fate would ensure they did, because secrets always have an expiration date. The morning air clung to Grace's skin like a fog of anxiety. She stood motionless in her Harlem apartment, the test in her trembling hand, blaring the result in quiet cruelty, pregnant. The word was a whisper and a scream all at once. She backed into the bathroom wall, her chest heaving. Her eyes scanned the narrow room as if looking for an escape from the truth, but it was written, sealed, and pulsing in her blood now. The memory of that night with Jonathan came back in a fragmented blur. Alcohol on his breath, pain etched into his features, his world falling apart, and hers collapsing moments later. It wasn't love, it wasn't even lust, it was despair, shared in the worst way. Now it had consequences far beyond her or him. Grace lowered herself onto the cold edge of the bathtub, legs giving out beneath the weight of what she knew this would cost. Elizabeth, her sister in spirit, her rock, her friend since middle school, her only real family in this city. Tears stung the corners of her eyes. She tried to hold them back, but they spilled without permission. Guilt layered over fear in suffocating waves. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal carrying a heartbeat. The hours blurred. She paced. She prayed. She even considered going to a clinic downtown but couldn't bring herself to walk in. It wasn't that she didn't understand her choices. It was that none of them made the truth go away. Jonathan had ghosted. No texts, no emails, no call. He disappeared like a man trying to bury shame beneath a passport and flight itinerary. Grace didn't even have the courage to call him, yet. Instead, she sat in front of the mirror that evening, makeup half done, as if getting ready could dress up the disaster inside her. The phone sat on the counter next to her foundation bottle. She picked it up, dialed, then ended the call, 3 times. On the 4th, it rang. Long, too long, his voice. Hello? Her heart dropped. It's me. Silence. Grace? He sounded unsure, like he wasn't sure if it was real or if she was part of the night he had tried so hard to erase. She swallowed hard. We need to talk. He walked out into the cool British air, pacing near the sidewalk. You okay? He asked, already knowing she wasn't. There was a beat of silence. His heart froze. He stopped walking. What? You heard me. He rubbed his temple. That's not... Grace, we were both drunk. We were broken. She said nothing. He continued, voice rising. It was one night. That can't be. Are you sure it's mine? Her sharp inhale cut through him like a knife. I'm not calling to argue. I just thought you had a right to know. Jonathan sat on a nearby bench, mind spinning. A child? With Grace? He thought of Elizabeth, her smile, her vision board on the fridge, her plans to open that art program, her belief in him when he barely believed in himself. He couldn't face her. Listen, he began, then paused. I'm dealing with a lot right now. I need time. Grace's voice cracked. Jonathan, I'm not asking you for anything. Just don't vanish again. But he already had. After that night, and now this call, Jonathan did what he'd mastered. Disappeared. No follow-up, no explanation, just silence. Grace stared at her phone hours later, thumb hovering over his contact. No response. Again. And the sun barely broke through the blinds of Elizabeth's living room when Grace showed up unannounced. She looked tired, fragile, and strangely distant. Her energy wasn't her usual fiery self. It was dimmed, like someone had turned her soul down to a whisper. Elizabeth, in a robe, hugged her without question. You okay? I need to talk, Grace said, eyes rimmed with red. Grace fidgeted, pulling at the hem of her sleeve. Do you remember that night, after Jonathan left for London? Elizabeth nodded. Her jaw tightened slightly, but she gave a soft yes. I wasn't okay. You weren't okay either. But I let something happen that should have never happened. Elizabeth's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Grace's voice cracked. That night, I was with Jonathan. I didn't plan it. He came by. We were both broken. I thought I was comforting him. But we made a mistake. Elizabeth's entire body went still. Grace reached into her purse and slid the pregnancy test across the table. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know how. Elizabeth stared at the stick. 2 pink lines. Her brain refused to compute. Her chest burned with betrayal. Her voice came out hollow. You slept with him? Grace nodded. Elizabeth backed away, her world crumbling. You were my best friend. I still am. No, you're not. Grace wept silently as Elizabeth stood up, hands trembling, and walked out of her own apartment, barefoot, confused, destroyed. Lowly, reality settled, she was on her own. Elizabeth didn't know where her feet were taking her. She walked through Harlem like a ghost with a heartbeat. The streets that once felt like home now felt unfamiliar. The corner store, the mural wall, even the gospel church where she and Grace used to volunteer, none of it felt safe anymore. She ended up on that same rooftop where she'd met Jonathan months before. Back then, it was stars and laughter. Now it was wind and silence. She looked out over the city. How did everything fall apart so fast? Her heart screamed. She had trusted both of them, loved both of them. Now, one carried the other's child. It wasn't the betrayal itself that broke her. It was the finality of it. Grace couldn't unsleep with him. Jonathan couldn't unleave. Her tears fell freely. Harlem below carried on like nothing happened. But up here, Elizabeth's world had stopped. She didn't scream. She didn't break anything. She just sat and let the grief move through her. Later that night, her phone buzzed. A message from Grace. "Please talk to me. I'm so sorry." She didn't respond. Then a second message. "I told him. He's gone silent again." Elizabeth's fingers hovered over her phone screen, then closed it. There were no words left. Only space. And a hollow where trust used to live. Elizabeth sat on the edge of her bed, the silence of her apartment pressing in from every side. The morning sun had risen, but she hadn't noticed. Her eyes were swollen, her throat dry from screaming the night before. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the breaking of something she thought would last. A love that had felt so rooted, so divine, now lay in ashes beneath the weight of betrayal. The memory of Grace's trembling voice still echoed in her ears. "Liz, I didn't mean for it to happen." But it did, and there was no undoing it. Without thinking, Elizabeth reached for her sweater and wrapped it around her shoulders like armor. Her legs moved before her mind could catch up. She stumbled down her apartment stairs, into the open Harlem morning, with her keys and nothing else in hand. She needed refuge, not from the city, not from her friends, from herself, from the rage, the despair, the impulse to hate everything. There was only one place she could go. The church stood quiet on Lenox Avenue, its red brick walls strong against the tide of city noise. Elizabeth pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the sanctuary. The smell of old wood, candle wax, and worn hymnals wrapped around her like a forgotten song. A few elders in the corner stopped their sweeping as they saw her. "Elizabeth?" Sister Alma called softly, but she didn't respond. She walked straight past them, down the aisle, past the empty pews, and toward the altar. Her knees buckled the moment she reached the front, and she collapsed in prayer, not a polished, well-spoken one, but a messy, tear-choked storm of broken sentences and gasping sobs. "God, I don't understand. I loved him. I trusted her. I gave them everything." Tears stained the floor as she rocked back and forth, clutching her chest like it might stop the ache inside. She whispered every word she didn't have the strength to say out loud. She begged for clarity, for peace, for anything that could pull her back to her feet. One of the church mothers came and placed a shawl over her shoulders, saying nothing, just presence. That was enough. Elizabeth didn't ask for answers anymore. She just asked for breath. One more breath to make it through the next hour. One more ounce of grace to keep her from hating the people she once held close. Her faith didn't erase the pain, but it steadied her hands. As the sun shifted through the stained glass windows, Elizabeth finally stood. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she walked out of the church taller than when she entered. Not healed, not whole, but covered in just enough strength to return to the silence of her apartment. The quiet in Elizabeth's apartment was deafening. Harlem moved outside her window. Horns honked. Children ran down sidewalks with sticky fingers and laughter. Buses hissed to a stop, but inside, time had folded into itself. Her once vibrant apartment, decorated with colourful prints, hand-painted canvases, and scented candles that filled the air with vanilla and cedarwood, now felt stale. The colours seemed muted, the candles untouched. The kitchen, once filled with life, laughter over gumbo pots and gospel tunes on Sunday evenings, now sat in shadows. She barely touched her sketchpad anymore. The Elizabeth who once stayed up past midnight, sketching dreams of an art centre for underprivileged youth, that Elizabeth had gone quiet. Her mind couldn't pull creativity from pain. It could only replay moments like a broken projector. Grace's confession, Jonathan's absence, the echo of betrayal from both sides. She stopped taking calls. At first it was just to avoid awkward conversations. Then it became avoidance of everyone. Grace, her co-workers at the youth program, even her Aunt Myrna who lived just 2 blocks over and always brought homemade cornbread when something was wrong. The missed calls piled up. So did the unopened text messages. Thinking of you. You okay, Liz? I'm sorry for what happened. She read none of them. Because no amount of sympathy could undo what had been done. No kind word could reach the part of her heart that had gone numb. She couldn't even pretend anymore. She stopped going to work, stopped brushing her hair some days. There were afternoons she sat on the couch for hours in silence, holding a throw pillow like a lifeline, not crying, not sleeping, just existing, suspended in a world where everything had paused except the ache. The fridge was mostly empty. She hadn't gone grocery shopping in over a week. She survived off takeout leftovers and cold cereal, not because she wanted to, because it was all she could bring herself to do. On a Thursday afternoon, she finally opened the window. The breeze swept in gently, and for a moment, the smell of roasting peanuts from the cart downstairs reminded her of summer walks with Jonathan. His hand in hers, her head against his chest, promises exchanged between jokes and laughter. She shut the window quickly. The memories came too fast and too loud. They made her chest tighten in ways she couldn't name. She couldn't even pray like before, not because she didn't believe, but because the words felt too heavy. There were no scriptures to soothe the kind of hurt she carried, a hurt shaped like betrayal, with sharp edges and cold corners. So she sat in silence instead. She lit one candle, just one. It flickered on the coffee table while she curled up in the armchair. Her Bible lay unopened beside her. She wasn't angry at God. Just tired. Tired of trying to hold on to faith when everything around her had cracked. But the candle stayed lit, and for now, that was enough. The silence between Elizabeth and Grace grew louder with each passing day. After the confession, there were no confrontations, no screaming matches, only a heavy stillness that blanketed their shared apartment like fog. They moved through the space like strangers, tiptoeing around one another, never making eye contact, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Grace started packing quietly. She didn't announce it, didn't sit down for a heart-to-heart. There was nothing to salvage. She knew it, and Elizabeth didn't have the energy to pretend otherwise. The boxes showed up one evening, stacked neatly by Grace's bedroom door. Then came the slow trickle. Books first, framed photos of their college years, clothes carefully folded, makeup kits wiped clean. Elizabeth didn't ask where she was going, and Grace didn't offer. The trust they'd built over a decade, from late-night dorm confessions to inside jokes and sisterhood vows, had collapsed in one choice. Grace had been the one person who knew how deep Elizabeth loved Jonathan, how many layers of her heart she had peeled back for him. And still, she'd said nothing. Until she had to. On a chilly Monday morning, Grace stood in the hallway with her last suitcase. She wore a grey hoodie, no makeup, hair pulled back in a bun that revealed the tired lines under her eyes. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, maybe apologize again, maybe explain, but Elizabeth sat at the kitchen counter, unmoved, stirring her tea slowly. Grace's voice was small. "I'm going to stay with my cousin in Flatbush. For a while." Elizabeth didn't look up. Grace waited a beat. "Liz, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go that far. I was broken too that night, and stupid, and—" She stopped herself, realizing the weight of her words couldn't rebuild what was gone. Elizabeth placed her spoon down. "You had a choice," she said quietly, her voice not angry, just hollow. "So did he. And you both chose each other in the worst way." Grace's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of the woman whose soul she had shattered. She gave a slow nod, turned, and rolled her suitcase out the door. Elizabeth didn't watch her leave. Jonathan never came back. There were no calls, no texts, not even a weak attempt at an explanation, just distance, like the man who once swore forever had suddenly forgotten where she lived, what they'd built, and who they'd promised to be. Elizabeth checked her phone once a day, not out of hope, but out of habit. At first, she expected at least something. A message saying he'd messed up, or a call begging to be heard. But nothing came. Weeks passed. Then a month. She saw a photo on social media once. Jonathan in a suit, smiling with colleagues in London. A promotion celebration someone had captioned. He looked rested, alive, like the man who'd once danced with her under Harlem streetlights never existed. The ache shifted from sharp to numb. One morning, she took down the photo of them on her bedroom wall. It had been their favourite, snapped by a stranger during a summer jazz festival in Central Park. Her hair was blowing in the wind. Jonathan had his arms around her, kissing her temple. They both looked wildly happy. She stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into a drawer, not to erase him, but because it hurt to remember who he used to be. The apartment was emptier now. No more laughter from Grace's room, no more late-night chats, no more Jonathan dropping by with takeout and a bottle of wine. Just quiet, and tea, and scripture on audio, softly playing while Elizabeth watered her plants, the only living things she still cared for. The loneliness didn't feel sharp anymore. It was a dull, constant weight she carried, like an oversized coat in summer, heavy but familiar. New York never stopped. It never paused to ask if your heart was broken or if you were too tired to keep going. The trains still ran. Horns still blared. Coffee shops still opened before dawn. Lovers still held hands in parks. Tourists still snapped selfies on street corners she once stood on with Jonathan. But Elizabeth? Elizabeth had paused. She still got up at 7 a.m. out of habit, but not with purpose. Her body moved like it remembered what used to matter. Shower, tea, check emails, paint a little, but her soul lagged behind. Her eyes had lost their shimmer. She wore the same pair of leggings 3 days in a row, and her once vibrant art supplies sat untouched on her desk, like forgotten instruments in a dusty chapel. Outside, Harlem pulsed with life. Vendors called out their specials on 125th. Young men blasted drill beats from Bluetooth speakers. Mothers wrangled toddlers in strollers. People argued over dominoes in the park. The gospel choir rehearsed at the church on Malcolm X Boulevard. A baby cried. A man whistled. Life danced without permission. Elizabeth heard it all, but she wasn't in it anymore. Her neighbors tried to check in. Miss Claudine from down the hall brought soup and left notes on her door. "I'm praying for you, baby," one read, written in shaky cursive. Even Brother Jackson from church came by one evening. He tapped gently, waited, and when she didn't answer, he slid a small pamphlet under the door. "You are not alone," it read. "God sees your pain." She saw it, but it didn't reach her. Her heart felt buried, not dead, but covered under layers of grief, betrayal, and silence. She couldn't find the strength to dig it out. Elizabeth went outside only when necessary. Bodega runs, maybe to the pharmacy, never the places that held memories. Not the rooftop where she first met Jonathan, not the sidewalk where they danced, not the Jamaican restaurant where she introduced him to oxtail and plantain, not the art center where she once dreamt of teaching kids. Everything felt haunted, and still, the city never slowed down. One Sunday, she tried going back to church. She wore her navy dress, the one Mama gave her for her 25th birthday. It hung loose now. Like everything else, it didn't fit right anymore. She slipped into the back pew, head low, hoping no one would notice. The choir was mid-song. Their harmonies soared, joyful and rich, but Elizabeth's ears registered them like noise behind glass. Sister Monroe, the worship leader, spotted her and beamed. She nudged the organist. "Look who's here, y'all." Heads turned. Elizabeth smiled weakly, then quickly bowed her head. The kindness felt too heavy to bear. The sermon was about healing. "Some of y'all carrying wounds," the preacher said, pacing the pulpit. "But God didn't leave you bleeding. He's waiting on you to reach out." Elizabeth didn't move. She listened, but she couldn't receive. Outside, the sun was blinding. Spring was blooming. Harlem smelled of street food and fresh air. A couple walked past her, arms linked, laughing over a shared joke. The woman looked just like her, from behind. Curly hair, denim jacket, warm skin tone. The man leaned in to whisper something, and the woman laughed. Elizabeth froze. For a split second, it felt like watching herself from a parallel life, one where the betrayal never happened, where dreams were still alive, where love hadn't folded like a paper crane in the rain. But that wasn't her life anymore. She wandered for blocks, aimless, past the mural on Frederick Douglass that used to inspire her, past the dance studio where she once taught weekend classes, past a father teaching his son to ride a bike. "You got it, champ," he called out, jogging beside him. Elizabeth stopped. Tears welled without warning. She didn't cry often, not in public. But this cracked her. The simplicity of joy, the reminder that some people still had safe, loving places to land. It broke something open. She turned the corner and ducked into a quiet alley between two brownstones. And there, surrounded by graffiti and peeling posters, she sank to the concrete and wept. Not just for Jonathan, not just for Grace, but for the version of herself that used to believe love was safe. She stayed like that for a while. Then finally she stood, wiped her face, and walked home, still broken, but breathing. The city roared around her. But Elizabeth? She moved like a whisper, still here, still silent, but not gone, not yet. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beep of machines and the steady hum of air conditioning. Grace lay in bed, sweat dampening her forehead, her chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. The labor had been long, nearly 16 hours, but when the baby's first cry echoed through the sterile room, everything else faded. A nurse placed the newborn in her arms, tiny, warm and wailing. Grace stared at the child, her eyes wet, but not just from exhaustion. The guilt she had carried these past months clashed with the purity she now held. Her hands trembled as she ran a fingertip along the baby's delicate cheek. "She's perfect," the nurse whispered with a smile, then quietly stepped away, giving Grace a moment. Grace hadn't had a single visitor. No flowers, no Jonathan, no Elizabeth, and yet she had prepared a name long before the contractions started. "Sophie," she whispered. Sophie, Elizabeth. She had debated for months whether she even had the right to attach that name, Elizabeth, to this child after what she'd done. But as the baby's fingers instinctively curled around hers, Grace knew that there was no other name that felt right. It was both an apology and a tribute. A silent acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, and the woman she once called a sister. Tears fell freely now. She had walked into betrayal, believing it to be comfort. She had fallen into weakness. And now, staring into the eyes of the little girl she would raise alone, Grace finally understood the weight of her choices. This child would grow up knowing love. She would not inherit the mess that brought her here. She would know her truth, in time, but never carry the shame. "I promise," Grace whispered, cradling Sophie close to her heart. "You will grow up surrounded by grace, not regret." Outside the delivery room, the city moved on. The world spun without a blink, but inside that quiet hospital, a new chapter had begun, one born of pain, but rooted in a promise. 3 weeks after Sophie's birth, Grace stood outside a familiar brownstone in Harlem, the same building where her betrayal had cracked something sacred. She didn't dare go inside. She couldn't. Instead, she clutched a simple box wrapped in soft brown paper, tied with cream-colored yarn. Inside it were 2 things, a small plush teddy bear and a handwritten letter. She hadn't written it easily. It took days and tears to find the right words, none of which felt enough. Every sentence had been written, scratched out, rewritten again. There was no version of this letter that could erase the pain she'd caused Elizabeth, but silence had stretched too long, and Grace knew she couldn't live with the weight of unfinished amends. She placed the package gently on the welcome mat. Her hands lingered for a second, trembling. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Later that evening, Elizabeth returned from a quiet evening at her small art therapy class. The building felt colder than usual, quieter. She noticed the package immediately. Cautiously, she bent down and picked it up. Her heart beat faster at the handwriting on the tag. She knew it immediately. Even though she hadn't seen it in months, the curves of the letters felt like echoes of old laughter and childhood dreams. Grace. She didn't open it at first. She brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for nearly an hour. Her chest felt heavy. Her limbs weighted. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to pretend it wasn't there, to pretend the damage wasn't real. But the part of her that was still healing knew she had to face it. She opened it slowly. The first thing she saw was the teddy bear, small hand-stitched eyes, and a ribbon around its neck that read with love. It wasn't store-bought. It had clearly been sewn by hand. She recognized the uneven stitching. Grace had once learned how to hand-stitch in high school for a class project. It was a quiet, personal detail that made the gesture all the more intimate and painful. Beneath the bear was a single page folded in half. The ink was smudged in places, and there were faint tear stains that blurred some of the words. Elizabeth read every line slowly. "Elizabeth, there are no words that will ever be enough. I betrayed you in a way that no apology can fix, but I want you to know that it was not love. It was a moment of shame, fueled by pain, loneliness, and my own brokenness. You were the one person who stood beside me through everything, and I shattered that. I gave birth to a baby girl. I named her Sophie Elizabeth, not to earn your forgiveness, but to honor the love and loyalty you gave me for years. You may never speak to me again, and I understand, but I needed you to know she exists. That she came from the mess I created, but she is innocent and beautiful. If I could undo it, I would, 1,000 times over, but I can't. So I will live every day trying to be the kind of mother she can be proud of. The kind of friend I should have been to you. With a heart full of regret, Grace." Elizabeth didn't move for a long time. Her eyes stayed on the page, her hands frozen. Her body shook, not from anger this time, but from a wave of grief that was finally letting itself be felt, not just for what happened, but for the friendship she had lost, the trust that had died, and the future that had once seemed so full. She picked up the teddy bear again, held it to her chest, and wept, not because she forgave yet, but because finally someone had acknowledged her pain. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. The city outside her window buzzed as usual. Sirens, cars, life moving forward. But inside her apartment, time stood still. She sat at her kitchen table with Grace's letter in her hand and the teddy bear on her lap, rocking slightly in her seat like she was holding her breath, between two worlds, the past that had betrayed her and the future that refused to arrive. When the tears stopped falling, what remained was exhaustion, not just the kind that sleep could cure, but the kind that came from holding everything in for too long. Grief had folded itself into every crevice of her soul, and this letter had peeled open the walls she'd built. She finally stood, went to the mirror in the hallway, and stared at herself. Her face was leaner, her eyes heavier, but beneath the fatigue she saw something else, a softness, a clarity. She realized this was the first time in months she'd allowed herself to feel everything without fear of collapsing. Later that morning, Elizabeth didn't go to work. She called out and stayed in, wrapped in her robe, brewing peppermint tea. The teddy bear sat on the couch beside her like a silent companion. She stared at it for a long while, remembering Grace's laugh, wild, contagious, and how, once upon a time, they were inseparable. She whispered out loud, "I hate what you did, but I don't hate you." The words hung in the air, heavy, honest. That was the moment her healing started. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't come with fireworks or a grand realization. It was small, quiet, like the first crack of dawn after a long, bitter night, and it changed something. She pulled out her old journal, the one she had stopped writing in after everything crumbled. For months the pages had stayed blank. Now her hand moved with new freedom. She didn't write about Grace or Jonathan directly, not yet. Instead, she wrote about herself, who she was, what she had lost, what she still believed in. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the pages were damp with tears. By the end of the day, Elizabeth opened her windows to let the air in. It was still winter in New York, but she didn't mind the chill. She welcomed it, a reminder she was alive. That weekend, she attended her first therapy session since the betrayal. She sat across from a soft-spoken black woman named Dr. Simmons, whose eyes carried deep understanding without judgment. Elizabeth didn't even make it through the first 10 minutes before breaking down. She wept for Grace, for Jonathan, for herself, for the hope that had died and the child she now knew existed, Sophie Elizabeth. That name alone made her heart break and heal at the same time. Dr. Simmons didn't offer platitudes, she just listened, and when Elizabeth finished, she handed her a tissue and said, "You don't have to rush forgiveness, but you do have to reclaim your peace." Those words stuck. That night, Elizabeth lit a candle, one of her mother's favorites, lavender and sage. She placed the teddy bear on her nightstand and prayed out loud. Not for revenge, not for answers, but for strength. She didn't know if she'd ever fully forgive Grace or Jonathan, but she was done being a prisoner to pain. This was the beginning, the first quiet, shaky steps toward reclaiming her voice, toward choosing peace over bitterness, and, maybe one day, toward forgiveness. The hallway of the community center smelled of paint and pencil shavings, a scent Elizabeth used to associate with joy. She hadn't stepped foot in this place since before Jonathan left, before Grace's betrayal, before the version of herself she'd worked so hard to become was broken into fragments she thought she'd never gather again. But here she was. Her heels echoed down the hallway as she walked past the mural she once helped a group of teens design. Bright colors, hopeful eyes, fists raised toward the sky. She paused for a moment, fingertips grazing the painted brick. Something stirred in her. That mural had been born in a time of fire, after a protest, after a loss, after community heartbreak. She had gathered those kids, given them brushes and freedom, and watched pain transform into something beautiful. She had forgotten that part of herself. Forgotten that she wasn't just the woman who got left. She wasn't just the best friend who was betrayed. She was also a creator, a mentor, a guide. And today, she was coming home to that calling. It started small. A week after receiving Grace's letter, Elizabeth emailed Mrs. Thompson, the center's program director. "Are the weekend workshops still running?" she asked. "I'd like to help, if there's room." The reply came an hour later. "Always room for you. They still talk about Miss Liz. We'd love to have you back." That first Saturday, she walked into a room filled with canvases, half-open paint tubes, and a group of middle schoolers talking over each other. Some recognized her instantly. "Miss Liz, you're back." One girl with blue braids lit up. "We thought you moved or something." Elizabeth smiled, heart full. "Nah, just needed a break. But I missed y'all." They missed her too. As the session began, she found herself slipping back into her rhythm. Teaching came naturally, not just the technical skills of blending colors or sketching proportions, but the emotional wisdom behind creation. The permission to express, the courage to reveal. One boy, Jamir, struggled with perfection. Every time a line didn't look right, he'd crumple the page. She knelt beside him. "It doesn't have to be perfect, just honest. Sometimes our mess tells a better story." He blinked, then slowly nodded. That page stayed on the easel. The next week, more kids showed up. Word had spread. Miss Liz was back. Elizabeth started planning larger projects, community murals, youth exhibits, even an open mic night for visual storytellers. For the first time in months, her calendar filled with things that gave her life instead of draining it. At home, her apartment began to shift too. She moved the teddy bear from her nightstand to the shelf beside her old sketchbooks. It didn't haunt her anymore. It reminded her of how far she'd come. She reopened her Etsy page, where she once sold custom portraits and digital prints. Orders trickled in. Then more. Her inbox buzzed with thank you notes and requests. "You captured my grandmother's spirit perfectly," one woman wrote. "Thank you for reminding me what love looks like." Elizabeth read that line 3 times. At church, she no longer sat in the back pew with her head down. She joined a small women's group. She spoke, quietly at first, then more confidently, about healing, disappointment, and grace. Her words didn't come from theory, they came from lived pain. And people listened. One Sunday, after sharing her testimony, a woman in her 40s approached her, eyes misty. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that," she said. "I thought I was the only one holding in betrayal, like it was my fault." Elizabeth touched her hand. "You're not alone, and it's not your fault." At night, she painted again, not for anyone else, just for herself. One piece stood out, a woman with closed eyes, head tilted slightly upward, surrounded by waves. On her chest was a heart made of stained glass, shattered, yet whole. She titled it, Becoming. She didn't need to rush healing. She didn't need to erase what happened. But she had found something better, purpose, the kind that was born from ashes but bloomed nonetheless. And as spring crept into the city, Elizabeth walked the streets again. Not with her head down, but with eyes open. The past hadn't disappeared, but neither had she. She was still here, still creating, still becoming. And for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. Jonathan sat in his dimly lit London apartment, a world away from Harlem. The city's sharp winter chill seeped through the old window panes, wrapping his solitude in silence. Outside, the rain tapped steadily, as though mimicking his restless thoughts. He hadn't reached out in months, not since the night everything collapsed, since Grace's trembling voice told him what they had done, and Elizabeth's number ceased to ring. He had buried himself in corporate duties, absorbing work like it could blot out guilt. He travelled, attended galas, closed major deals, but nothing felt like home. Until the email arrived, a message titled, "You should see this, if you still care." No body text, just one attachment. He opened it slowly. It was a black and white ultrasound photo. The baby was small, curled and real. Sophie. He didn't know her name yet, but something about the tiny footprint printed at the bottom shook him. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. She had been born. His chest constricted. This wasn't a concept anymore. It was a child. His child. He dropped his phone, sinking into the worn leather armchair. Months of avoidance, of silencing the weight of his betrayal, of running from his mistakes, suddenly unraveled. He stared into the dim light, as if waiting for London's fog to offer clarity. It didn't. But something else did. A memory. The rooftop. Elizabeth's laugh. The gospel music. The sweetness of a sidewalk dance. Her dreams. Her fire. And now, this child. A baby he had never met. A daughter brought into the world, tangled in pain, silence, and decisions he had made in weakness. He couldn't run anymore. He opened his laptop and booked a flight. First class or not, it didn't matter. He needed to go home. Not for closure, for responsibility, for redemption. He didn't know if Grace would let him in. He didn't dare imagine Elizabeth's face if they crossed paths. But he knew this much. Sophie deserved her father to show up, even if late. Jonathan arrived at Heathrow Airport with a duffel bag slung across his shoulder. There was no assistant, no fanfare, no driver this time, just a man weary with consequence. He sat at the gate, scrolling through old pictures on his phone. Photos of Harlem, Grace's goofy birthday grin, and Elizabeth, her eyes always fierce, soft, alive. He stopped at one of her, laughing in the middle of a community mural painting. Her hands were covered in paint, her joy undeniable. He hadn't looked at these in months. His seat was called. He boarded quietly, took the window seat, and stared into the clouds as the city he had used to escape began shrinking beneath him. During the flight, he kept thinking of what to say, but every sentence felt hollow. "I'm sorry" wasn't enough. "I didn't mean to hurt you" sounded like a lie. And yet, he had to try. For Sophie, for a new start, even if he was met with silence. The plane landed at JFK a little after 7 p.m. Snow had begun to dust the city streets. The holiday lights were up, twinkling across neighborhoods, storefronts, lampposts, Christmas Eve. The irony wasn't lost on him. He took a cab to his old brownstone. He didn't expect anyone to be there. Grace had moved out. Elizabeth was gone, God knows where. He stood in front of the stoop, the same one where Elizabeth once kissed him goodnight. The house looked smaller now, or maybe he had just grown in all the ways that didn't matter. He inhaled deeply, stepped inside, and was met with silence. Dust, faded photographs on the wall, reminders, and a single envelope on the dining table. "If you're ready to meet her, come to 231 Lenox Ave, 8 p.m. Gee, it wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. He checked the time, 7:21. He didn't shower, didn't unpack. He left the house with the same heartbeat he had the day he first danced with Elizabeth on the sidewalk. Terrified, hopeful, unworthy, human. The building was modest, a brown brick walk-up nestled between a deli and a corner market. Christmas lights framed the windows, and inside, shadows moved gently against the soft glow of holiday warmth. No answer. He waited, heart pounding, then knocked again. The door creaked open. Grace stood there. No makeup, tired eyes. A baby monitor in one hand. They stared at each other in silence. Grace didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. She stepped aside. Jonathan entered slowly, removing his coat. The air smelled like vanilla candles and baby lotion. Soft jazz played in the background. He followed her to the small nursery at the end of the hall. Sophie was asleep in a crib by the window, wrapped in a pink blanket. Her tiny fists curled near her cheeks, her breathing soft and steady. Jonathan stopped at the threshold. Everything in him wanted to fall to his knees. His voice cracked. She's beautiful." Grace nodded. "She's yours." He took a step closer, but not too close. He didn't want to wake her. Or maybe he just didn't think he deserved to. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "I never meant to." Grace raised a hand gently. "Not now." She handed him a folded note. "Elizabeth sent this, months ago. I didn't have the nerve to read it, but maybe it's time you did." He took it with shaking hands. He looked again at Sophie. Christmas Eve, the night the world believes in new beginnings. And here he was, standing before the truest one he'd ever known. They sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of untouched tea between them. Jonathan unfolded the letter, Elizabeth's handwriting, the one he memorized in quiet mornings. "To the man I once believed in, you hurt me, deeply. You shattered something in me that took years to build, and yet I still pray for you, not because you deserve it, but because I need to free myself. Grace is stronger than either of us give her credit for. That baby, she's a miracle. Don't run again, Jonathan. Don't destroy her trying to fix yourself. I'll be okay. I'm rebuilding, slowly, and one day I'll forgive you fully. Maybe not today, maybe not even this year, but I will. Just be better than the man you were." For her, the paper trembled in his hand. Grace wiped her cheeks and whispered, "She still believes in you, in some way." Jonathan looked at her. "Do you?" Grace shook her head slowly. "I believe in Sophie, and I believe no child deserves to grow up without knowing who her father is." He nodded. "I want to be in her life. I don't expect anything else. Just let me be present." "Then be present," she said quietly. "But if you disappear again, don't come back." He nodded solemnly. In the next room, Sophie stirred. Grace walked to check on her, and Jonathan followed, this time aloud. It wasn't a reunion, it wasn't closure. It was the fragile, trembling start of something he thought he'd lost forever, a chance. Christmas night had arrived in Harlem with a hush, as if the city itself was catching its breath. The snow had begun to fall again, thin flurries swirling beneath the soft orange glow of the streetlights. Most windows flickered with warmth, families laughing over dinner, gospel playing low, the scent of cinnamon and roasted meats filling homes. But Elizabeth walked alone. She wore a long grey coat, scarf tucked under her chin, hands buried in her pockets. Her boots crunched against the sidewalk, step after step, leaving imprints that would vanish by morning. She hadn't planned to be outside, but the walls of her apartment felt too loud with memories. Grace's laughter once echoed there. Jonathan's scent had lingered in corners long after he was gone. And now, Sophie's name floated in the air like a whisper, even though the baby had never set foot inside. It had taken everything in her to attend the Christmas morning service. The hymns, the nativity scene, the message of hope, it all pierced deeper than usual. Afterward, she couldn't sit in her living room and pretend the day was just another holiday. So she walked, past the mural she helped paint 2 years ago, past the park bench where Grace first cried about her parents, past the flower shop where Jonathan used to surprise her with white roses, even when she said she didn't like clichés. She hadn't spoken to either of them in weeks. Only the letter she'd written to Jonathan had travelled the bridge between them, and even that she didn't know if he had read. She paused in front of the old corner deli, the one with the neon sign that blinked halfway. Snow gathered at the collar of her coat. Christmas used to feel magical. Now, it felt like memory. She turned down Lennox, heart heavy but beating. She didn't know why her feet carried her there, but some part of her wasn't ready to close the night alone. As Elizabeth turned the corner near 131st Street, she saw a figure ahead, standing still beneath the street lamp. The falling snow blurred his features at first. Just a tall silhouette, shoulders hunched, a slow-moving cloud of breath around him. Then the light caught his face. Jonathan. He wasn't dressed for winter, just a dark wool coat, scarf slung loosely, no gloves. His hands were buried in his coat pockets, as if trying to hold something fragile together inside himself. She stopped. He hadn't seen her yet. Her heart thudded, torn between turning back and standing her ground. But he looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them dimmed. The noise of the city faded into the background. It was just them, two broken hearts carrying too much history, meeting again in the hush of snow and Christmas. Jonathan slowly stepped forward, his breath catching. "Elizabeth," he said softly, like the word had waited all year to leave his mouth. She didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, a teddy bear, worn, familiar. It was the same bear she had seen in a photo Grace had once shared in happier times, a tiny pink ribbon around its neck. The bear had belonged to Sophie now. He clutched it tightly, then extended it toward her. "I didn't know if I'd ever see you again," he said, "but I came hoping you would." Elizabeth stared at the bear, her chest rising and falling. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here," she replied, voice firm but not cold. "I wasn't sure if I deserved to be," he admitted. The snow fell in silence between them, like time giving them space to decide what came next. Jonathan didn't rush. He didn't flood the air with excuses. He stood still, just a man who had messed up, grown up, and was finally willing to carry the weight. "I think about what I did, every single day," he began, his voice low and rough. "Not just what I did to you, but what I did to myself, to Grace, to that child." He held up the teddy bear. "She holds this when she sleeps. It smells like vanilla and lavender now. Grace said it helps her calm down. I thought, maybe if I gave it to you, it'd feel like you could hold a part of her, too." Elizabeth hesitated, then slowly reached for the bear. It was warm, soft, heavier than she expected. "She looks like you," Jonathan added gently. "But when she frowns, it's me. She already has that little stubborn lip curve." A soft chuckle escaped Elizabeth's throat, caught somewhere between pain and memory. Jonathan stepped closer, just enough to not invade her space. "I don't expect anything from you, not now. Maybe not ever," he said. "But I wanted to tell you that I was a coward. I didn't want to face what I'd done. And in running, I hurt the only two women I ever really loved." Elizabeth blinked back tears. "I know," he replied, voice breaking, "but it brought me back anyway." She clutched the teddy bear closer. They stood like that for a long while, under the falling snow between the weight of the past and the uncertainty of whatever came next. Elizabeth looked up at Jonathan. The snow had begun to stick to his lashes. His eyes, those same eyes that once made her believe in softness, were filled with quiet remorse. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't step into his arms. But she didn't walk away either. "I'm still angry," she said softly. "Not just at you, at myself, at everything. I understand you broke something that doesn't glue back easy." Jonathan nodded. "But," she continued, "I also know what it's like to live with bitterness too long. It swallows you. and I don't want to be that woman anymore." He waited. She stepped forward, not much, just close enough for the silence to be honest. "This bear," she said, holding it up, "it means something, not because of what happened, but because of what's here now." Jonathan's breath caught. "I don't forgive you," she added. "Not tonight, but I believe people can change, and if that change is real, maybe we start from there." He blinked back tears. "I'll take whatever you're willing to give, even if it's just the chance to try again." She turned her gaze upward, to the quiet falling snow, to the glow of the street lamp, to the stillness that had once felt like loneliness, but now felt like the breath before a new sentence. "Walk me home," she said. He didn't say a word, he just nodded. They walked side by side, slowly. The space between them was still there, but it wasn't as wide anymore. And in Elizabeth's arms, the teddy bear sat quietly, like a symbol, of pain, of growth, of a child, of hope. It started slowly, quietly, just a man showing up when he said he would. Jonathan returned to Harlem with a quiet resolve, not with grand gestures or apologies repeated. He brought diapers, formula, tiny socks with ducks on them. He learned how to warm a bottle just right and how to bounce Sophie on his knee until her soft cries turned into small giggles. Grace was cautious, Elizabeth watchful. But Sophie accepted him with the blind, open arms of a child untouched by bitterness. At first, Jonathan only visited twice a week. He would read her stories, long after she fell asleep, just to hear the sound of his voice near hers. He cleaned the kitchen, folded baby clothes, and replaced the broken heater in Grace's apartment without being asked. Then the visits became more regular. One morning, when Grace overslept from exhaustion, she awoke to find Sophie already dressed and giggling in Jonathan's arms. He'd somehow figured out how to tie the impossibly small bows on her pink onesie. "You can't just come in and act like you've always been here," Grace said that day, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "I'm not acting," Jonathan replied. "I'm just trying. One small moment at a time." And that's exactly what he did. He didn't push for titles or affection. He didn't ask for trust. He built it. He became the man who changed diapers at 3 a.m., who paced the hallway with Sophie on his chest when she had colic, who stood in the back at the pediatrician's office, letting Grace take the lead. He was simply there. And Grace had never pictured herself raising a child with someone she didn't trust. Even after Sophie was born, her world was small, just the baby and herself. Nights were long, food often cold, and emotions ran tight. She didn't expect help, not from Jonathan, not from anyone. But something about his presence, it stayed steady. When Sophie had her first cold, Jonathan was already there with baby-safe medicine and a warm compress. He didn't overstep. He stood by the door as Grace rocked Sophie through the night, only speaking when she asked for water or a break. "I wouldn't trust me either," he replied softly. "But Sophie deserves better than our mistakes." He nodded. So they created boundaries. They texted only about Sophie. Drop-offs happened at the corner coffee shop, Neutral Ground. Jonathan was never late. He always brought her back with a clean diaper, fed, and a new book or small toy. Grace noticed how Sophie lit up when she saw him. Her little hands clapped. Her giggles doubled. She recognized his voice now, searched for it in crowds. Grace tried not to feel that sting. But deep down, she saw it. Jonathan wasn't the man who would run. He was becoming the man who stayed. The real shift happened one rainy afternoon. Grace was caught in traffic with Sophie fussing in the back seat. Jonathan, nearby, offered to meet them at the gas station. She hesitated. Then she said yes. That day, for the first time, she watched him hold Sophie in the rain, shielding her with his coat, while smiling through the downpour. Not for show. Not for Grace. Just for the child. She didn't say anything then. But that night, she placed a second key under the Mat D. Somehow, that mattered more than anything he could have said. Elizabeth stood in the community centre's art room, sleeves rolled, paint under her nails, and heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't plan to return to art. After everything, she thought that part of her had closed forever. But one afternoon, while cleaning out her hall closet, she found a canvas. It was blank. Waiting. Something about that emptiness felt honest, so she picked up a brush again. At first, she painted late at night, quiet scenes of Harlem rooftops, frozen streets in snowfall, and windows glowing with unseen warmth. Then she joined a local program that taught creative therapy to teenage girls, most from broken homes, some pregnant, some already mothers. She didn't speak of her own wounds. She didn't have to. They saw it in her eyes and found comfort in her presence. She led workshops on Saturdays, guided mural projects on crumbling brick walls near the train station. She used her hands not just to create, but to heal. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about planting something new in the places where grief used to live. On a spring afternoon, she hung a painting in the community centre's main hall. It was a portrait of a mother and daughter, backs turned to the viewer, holding hands at a riverside. Above them, a single dove flew. Grace came by later that day. She stared at the painting for a long time. "You found peace," Grace whispered. "I'm learning to," Elizabeth replied. And peace doesn't mean erasing what happened. It means making something from it. She wasn't fully healed, but she was moving, not away from the past, but towards something that honored it, softened it, and gave it meaning. It began with a letter, not a long one, just a folded card slipped under Elizabeth's door with a small sunflower sketched on the front. Inside it read, "I still don't know how to say I'm sorry for what I broke, but I never stopped loving you. I named her Sophie Elizabeth because you were always the soft place I landed. I miss my friend, Grace." Elizabeth read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. She didn't respond right away, but the following Sunday, she saw Grace walking home from the store, Sophie tucked against her chest in a soft grey sling. The child's eyes were wide, curious and full of warmth. Elizabeth hesitated, then crossed the street. Grace stopped. Neither woman spoke immediately. Then Elizabeth leaned forward, gently brushing a curl from Sophie's forehead. "She's beautiful," she said, voice even. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "She has your chin." "And his eyelashes." Grace nodded. There was a beat of silence. Then Elizabeth reached into her tote and pulled out a tiny knitted hat, sunflower yellow with 2 little ears at the top. Grace blinked quickly, then accepted it. Sophie squealed as the hat went over her curls, grinning as if she understood the moment was something bigger than all of them. They walked together for a few blocks that day. Not friends yet, not enemies, just 2 women, broken and rebuilding, brought together again by a little girl who smiled like the world hadn't hurt her yet. It was a beginning, and that was enough. The first snowfall of the new year came early, soft, silent and unannounced. It dusted the rooftops of Harlem like powdered sugar, blanketing the sidewalks with fresh beginnings. Inside the small apartment on 123rd Street, warmth wrapped around the walls like a thick, invisible quilt. Grace stood at the stove, stirring her grandmother's chicken stew with careful hands, humming an old church hymn under her breath. Sophie sat on the counter beside her, smacking her little palms on the edge of the wooden board as Jonathan carefully chopped carrots. "Daddy, slower," Sophie giggled. "You're not a chef," Jonathan laughed, holding up a misshapen piece. "You're right, but I'm learning." Grace glanced over her shoulder and shook her head with a smile. She hadn't called him babe again, hadn't kissed him since the hospital, but she let him stay. He had a drawer now. He slept on the couch most nights unless Sophie had a nightmare. Then he was on the floor next to her bed, hand gently placed on her back until her breathing evened out. It was slow work, brick by brick. But they were building something, not the glossy version of what once was, but something more real, weathered by pain, tempered by truth. After dinner, they curled on the couch. Sophie sat between them, holding her worn teddy bear like a crown jewel. The bear had lost one eye, and one of its arms was sewn on with blue thread now, but it was loved. "Can we watch the movie with the dancing penguins?" Sophie asked, blinking up at Grace. "You mean Happy Feet again?" Jonathan teased. "Yes, Daddy likes it too, don't lie." Grace chuckled and reached for the remote. "All right, but just one time." As the movie played, Sophie drifted asleep, her head on Jonathan's chest, feet in Grace's lap. The silence was sweet. "Some nights I still wonder if I deserve this," Jonathan whispered. Grace didn't look at him, just kept stroking Sophie's curls. "It's not about deserving," she murmured. "It's about showing up, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough." The small Harlem Community Theatre had only 50 seats, mismatched cushions, and a creaky stage that needed polishing every week. But to Elizabeth it was sacred ground. She stood behind the curtain, clipboard in hand, watching the young actors rehearse. The current play, Little Lights, was about 3 sisters who survive a fire and rebuild their lives through music. The script was rough, written by a teenager from her art therapy class, but it held raw beauty. Elizabeth directed it with gentle authority, her voice no longer trembled when she gave notes. Her steps were firm, her shoulders relaxed. She wore her curls loose now, and the silver strands that peeked through her dark hair gave her a quiet wisdom. Her eyes no longer carried the weight of grief. only the gentleness of someone who had lived through storms and chosen not to drown. After rehearsal, a young girl named Tasha lingered. "Miss Liz, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Elizabeth smiled. "How did you forgive someone who broke you?" Elizabeth paused. She walked over to the edge of the stage and sat, patting the spot beside her. "I didn't do it all at once," she said. "I let myself feel everything first, the anger, the sadness, the shame. And then I realized, forgiveness wasn't just for them, it was for me." Tasha nodded slowly. Was it hard? Every day. But it got easier. And then one day it became peace. They sat in silence, the stage lights dimming slowly around them. Later that night, Elizabeth locked up the theatre and stepped into the cold. As she walked down the block, she passed a small window display. In it sat a teddy bear. It wasn't the same one Grace had sent, but it looked just like it. A soft brown replica with a yellow ribbon around its neck. She smiled. Even broken stories could find their curtain call. Sophie's teddy bear had travelled more emotional miles than most adults. It had sat beside her during sleepless nights, accompanied her to doctor visits, and soaked up tears from both Grace and Jonathan. But more than anything, it had become a bridge. One Sunday after church, Elizabeth held the bear as Sophie ran off to play in the snow with other kids. She hadn't intended to keep it in her hands for long, but something about its familiar weight made her pause. Grace approached with a cautious smile. "She won't let anyone wash it," Grace said. "Says it smells like home." Elizabeth chuckled. Grace didn't ask what. She already knew. That evening they gathered for a small dinner to celebrate Sophie's 3rd birthday. It was just them, Grace, Jonathan, Sophie, and Elizabeth, crowded around a modest cake in the apartment kitchen. After the candles were blown and laughter filled the air, Sophie climbed onto Elizabeth's lap with the teddy bear in hand. "Nana Liz," Sophie said, "can Bear come live with you sometimes?" Elizabeth blinked. "Why?" "He needs to learn painting," Sophie replied seriously. "Like me," everyone laughed. But something in Elizabeth's chest cracked open with warmth. Later that night, she sat in her apartment with the bear on her work table, paints and brushes nearby. She didn't start a new canvas. She didn't need to. She just looked at the bear and whispered, "Thank you for surviving with us." Months passed. The seasons shifted again, and Harlem began to breathe with spring. Flowers pushed through sidewalk cracks. The streets were filled with music, markets, and children's laughter. One sunny afternoon, Elizabeth hosted a community art show at the theatre. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. Artwork by survivors, youth, mothers, and men who had fallen and chosen to rise again. One piece stole everyone's attention, a framed portrait of a teddy bear sitting beneath a tree, its eyes uneven, but its posture proud. The plaque read, "Forgiveness wears fur." Grace stood beside Elizabeth, holding Sophie's hand. "He still makes mistakes." "Mistakes," Grace said softly, referring to Jonathan. "So do we all," Elizabeth replied. Jonathan joined them moments later, holding a lemonade and 2 cookies. Sophie squealed and reached for him. They didn't look perfect, but they looked like peace. And peace, Elizabeth had learned, was not the absence of pain, but the presence of love that chooses to stay. As the day wound down, Elizabeth stood on the stage and addressed the small crowd. "There was a time," she began, "when I believed betrayal was the end of everything, that some wounds could never heal, but I was wrong." She glanced at Grace, at Jonathan, at Sophie. "Healing takes honesty, change, and more love than you think you can give, but it's possible. We are proof." She held up the teddy bear, now framed in a shadow box, and smiled. "Sometimes the softest things hold the loudest lessons." The crowd applauded. Later, as the sun dipped behind the buildings and the lights of Harlem flickered on, the 4 of them walked home together, no longer broken pieces of a past, but mended parts of a future worth sharing. And as Sophie skipped ahead, giggling with her bear in hand, the message hung in the air like the soft chime of bells. Second chances don't come easy. But when they do, don't waste them.